Trust me, I know it's stressful, right? But guess what? Today, we want to take your mind off of all your stress and get down to business. Let's go. You're listening to the Master Your Lens podcast, episode 179.
Hey, John Lee Dumas here, the founder and host of EO Fire, and welcome to the Master Your Lens podcast, the photography podcast dedicated to sharing inspiring stories, technical tips, and powerful secrets to help you become a better photographer. And now, your host, Matthew Jordan Smith.
Hello, Photography Nation. It's November 4th, the day after the election in America. 2020 has been quite a year. As of this moment, we still don't know who has won the election, and that has caused a lot of stress. I get it. But guess what? Did you know one of the best ways to relieve stress is photography? Yes, photography is a great way to reduce your stress. So, for the next 15 to 20 minutes, do yourself a favor. Unplug from everything going on around you, and let's focus on photography. That little bit about photography being a great stress reliever is true. It's an amazing way to take away your stress. As a matter of fact, maybe you can do that right now. Let's pause and go grab our cameras, because this is an historic day, and you need pictures to remember everything that's going on around you. So grab your camera. I've got mine. Here, let me turn it on and do a quick self-portrait. Perfect. I've now documented myself doing this podcast on this day. Now, it does feel good for you to grab your camera, look through your viewfinder, compose your image, and take a picture. But today we're going to talk about the art of storytelling, how you put all your pictures together to tell a great story. And by the way, in case you didn't know it, you are very resilient. You can make it through anything, whatever is going on. So let's help you tell a better story so you can work more, have more fun, and push all your stress away. Lately, in my private group, we've been talking about storytelling, and we've been going through this whole process of creating stories. Today, I want to give you a sneak peek into those elements that make a great photo story. The other day, I was watching a movie. Actually, lately, I've been watching a lot of movies and dissecting them to see what makes their story so powerful. The last few months, I've been working very hard and really haven't watched anything. So I took a break, turned on Netflix, and started looking for something interesting. I came across this movie, had no idea what it was about, and decided to check it out. Now, normally when I'm trying a new movie, I'll give it 5 to 10 minutes to see if it's interesting or not. The movie we decided to watch is called My House, and my wife and I started watching the show. The first few minutes of watching this movie, I was pulled in. I was curious and wanted to know more. As I watched the movie, I started feeling certain emotions. I want you to think about that, because when people see your pictures, they'll also connect with your work. If you do a good job of doing more than just taking a pretty picture, if you fill that picture and make it feel like a story, give them something to be curious about, make them want to keep looking at your work, keep going through the work. If you can pull them in, you've got them. But how do you take a picture and make a beautiful story? You first need to have a theme, an idea. Maybe from that idea, you get a title for your story or a title for your picture. The name of this movie was called My House. And I was curious, why is this movie called My House? From the title, it really had me. I was curious. What about your pictures? Do they have a title? Will the title pull people in? Now, I must warn you, if you decide to watch this movie, it is scary. I found myself jumping at points because there are parts in this film that will make you jump. But the other thing that really made me curious about this movie was the lighting. It's done very well, and so is the story. You know, whenever we're watching a movie, we're trying to figure out the story. At first, it may not be apparent, but little by little, you piece it together. It comes together if it's done right. When talking about stories, we often hear about certain elements. I mentioned the theme or the title earlier, but what about the place? Where does the story take place? Is it in a city, countryside? Is it in America or another country? Once you have your place down, what about the characters? Who's the main character in your story? Is there one? Who's the hero? Every great picture needs a hero. Is there something interesting about your hero? Think about all these things for your photo story. And then your narrative. Is there a beginning, a middle, an end? Does your story start at the beginning? It doesn't have to. It's totally up to you. It is your story. Here's an example. Maybe you want to do a story on 2020, but you start your story today, November 4th, the day after the election in America. But during the course of telling your story, you jump around the entire year. You go from November to March, from March to April. Then from April, maybe you jump to December 31st, 2020. Your characters? Well, there are a lot of characters this year you can choose from. You pick it. It's your story. Maybe you want to light it where everything seems gray because it's that type of year. Maybe you want to feel a little underexposed, but then all of a sudden there's this bright light that comes along on November 5th that changes your entire story. It's your story. Do it any way you want to and use your light to give it feeling. Okay, back to this movie. Well, as I'm watching this movie, I start to notice how light plays a huge role in how you feel. But doesn't it always? I found myself loving the lighting in this film. It's done very well. It's my type of light. And in many parts of the film, the light becomes another character in the film. It's not the main character, but it is an essential character in telling the story. As photographers, we're always telling a story. You're not just taking a picture, or you shouldn't be anyway. In my private group, we spent the entire month of October just breaking down the elements of a story and going into them step by step. This month of November, we're going to the next phase in shooting the story. And then in December, we'll be editing and putting our stories together. If you want to be a part of this, just jump into photographylightingcourse.com. For those of you who know about my course, it is a lighting course, but we go through different parts of photography in the course. And right now, we're going through storytelling. And yes, light can be a major part of your story or not. It's totally up to you. But as I watched this movie, My House, on Netflix, I was pulled into the story. The light was so beautiful at times. This month, I've also been dissecting stories. So I decided to go through an old show, one that I've seen before, where I know the entire story, go back and watch it again and dissect it, take it apart. So I decided to go back and watch all of the episodes of Game of Thrones from season 1 on. Now, many people have watched Game of Thrones. They know the entire story, how it starts and how it ends, and everything in between. But what pulled you into watching in the first place? You know you make a decision right away, whether you will stay with something or let it go. What was it about Game of Thrones in that first episode that pulled you in and made you watch? I was curious, so I wanted to go back and watch from the first episode, so that's what I did. Now, this time around, I'm really looking to see how they pull you in, how they tell their story from the very beginning. And the first scene, photographically, is beautiful. The composition pulls you in. It keeps you there. It's a very warm shot. Then it transitions to a very cool, cold-looking shot as they change locations. Right away, you get a sense of place. The first shot is a tight shot, and then you pull back to a scene where you see a great location. You know you're not in a city. You know you're in a different time. It's not modern day. All this happens right away. 5 minutes into watching the first part of the show, you are intrigued. You know you're in for something different. And that something different is what keeps you there. Now let's think about that when it comes to your photography. If everything you're showing is expected, what's going to keep them there? People scroll through their feed every day. They go through websites, they go through Instagram, they go through social media, different sites. Maybe they pause and stop and look at your work, or maybe they don't. What makes someone stop? It's that something different in your picture or in your story. You need that something special to grab their attention. Think about the last movie you saw or the last book you read. What pulled you in to keep you there, to make you want to turn the page or stay with the movie and keep watching? It's not a bad idea for you to do exactly what I've done. Go back and look at a favorite show or a favorite movie, maybe one you've watched over the last year or 2 years. Watch it again and take it apart. But this time, pay attention to the story. What made you stay with it? This year, a lot of people have been binging on Netflix. Remember back in March, beginning of the pandemic, when we're all in lockdown? Many people were glued to Netflix. What made you decide to watch the things that you watched? For whatever reason, crazy things seem to get our attention. And sometimes you wonder, why in the world am I watching this crazy situation? Is it because we need to be entertained? How many times have you said this year, "Oh, that's crazy," but you kept watching? Remember Tiger King, that crazy Netflix show? People were glued to it. It got crazier and crazier. And then 2020 got crazier and crazier as well. They stayed with it because it was unexpected. Well, everything about 2020 has been unexpected. And yes, a little crazy, even right now. But we're not going to talk about that. Today, we're talking about your story and how you shoot your story in a manner that gets people to stick with it, to stay with your pictures, to stay with your story. When it comes down to the art of storytelling, it's about you telling your story, shooting your images in a unique way. Now, we're used to a story with a standard narrative, a beginning, a middle, an end. What if you change things around? The first time I saw a Quentin Tarantino movie, what was so intriguing is that the story was not your standard narrative. It was out of sequence. And that's part of what made it interesting. Take his movie, Pulp Fiction. The movie jumps all over the place. And that is part of what, well, there are many things, of course, but that's part of what makes his movies so interesting. Pulp Fiction is definitely not your standard narrative. But the number one thing that makes Quentin Tarantino's movies interesting, well, some of them anyway, is the way he tells his stories. They're not what you are expecting. In photography, we are used to seeing the same thing over and over. And I must admit, that's getting boring. But it doesn't have to be. You are in charge of your story. How you tell it, how you sequence it. Your narrative is up to you. You can start at the end if you want to, and then bring us through the story where it makes sense. Or you can make it where it doesn't make sense. I mean, what about 2020 makes sense? Imagine if you saw this in a futuristic movie. Aliens come to the planet and infect everyone with a virus. But the only way to get over the virus is by wearing a mask. The virus goes out of control. And the country that has the most cases, millions more than any other country, fights over wearing a mask. Sounds crazy. Or does it? It's your story. You can do anything you want. So how do you learn how to tell a great visual story? Look at other amazing visual stories. You've got to do your research. Do your homework. Put in the time. Study ones that work. Look at different types of stories. American stories, Japanese stories, French stories. Become a student of the story. And definitely check out the light. How they use light to tell a story. How they use light to make you feel a certain way. You can do the same thing. And then get to work telling your story. We have all been through a lot. And it's not over. You have a lot to say. Even right now, you're probably feeling a lot of emotions. And that's a good thing. Take however you're feeling and put that into your work. However you're feeling right now. There are a lot of people who feel exactly the same way when it comes to telling a story, a visual story. You don't have to make everybody happy. That's actually impossible. But don't worry about that. There are many people who will identify with your story, and those are the ones who will hire you over and over and over again. So get to work. You've got your camera out right now. Take pictures today. Tell your story. You'll be glad you did. And you'll take away your stress. Do your homework. Don't just watch a movie. Go back and dissect it. Look at the story. Find out what makes you stay with it. What made you watch it? What made you like a movie? What made you like a book? Go back and look at the first 10 minutes of the movie. Go back and read the first few pages of a book. What pulled you in? What was it about those first pages of that book or the first line of the book that made you say, oh, I've got to read the next line? Turn the next page. People are looking at your work the same way. What's going to make them stay with you? Go on to look at your next image. Go on to want to hire you. And then pay your price to have you photograph them. Work on your story. Work on your light. If you're not so sure about your lighting, you know you need to improve, but you're not sure how to get there. Do me a favor. Come and join us in Photography Lighting Course. This course is all about teaching you how to become a better photographer in every single way, starting with your lighting. To join us, just go to photographylightingcourse.com. That's photographylightingcourse.com. When you join us, you'll get the online modules, and you have 24/7 access to the course. You also get the course for life. And then the course comes with weekly live training sessions. It happens every single week. Students are from all over the world, and we're all here growing together. And so can you. Just go to photographylightingcourse.com, and I'll see you at the next live training session. All right, Photography Nation, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Master Your Lens podcast. Stay positive, keep your head up, get out there and shoot your story. I look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Master Your Lens podcast. I'm photographer Matthew Jordan Smith saying, always dream big. Bye for now.